Okay, all right. So I'm here to talk today about Zen of PowerShell. It's primarily a guide for C# developers. So a little bit about me. I'm a C# programmer. I am currently working on energy trading in the city. I used to work with pensions until George Osborne screwed that one up. My main use of PowerShell is to deal with CI, CD, and historically I've used MS Release Management. Now we're using other tools. I'm not a PowerShell expert. I'm a C# folk, so I'm not brilliant at that. And mostly this particular talk is all about confusing stuff for C# developers. Twitter ID's there, and eventually I will be tweeting the URL of the GitHub repository that's got all this stuff in. So this bit's important, and it's time to fire up PowerShell, and this probably is one of those little bits which, if you know this already, great. If you don't, it's quite an important distinction for those of us who... there we go, it's better. For those of us who start out from C#. So my next trick is... There we go, good. Nip into slide 3. So, great, there we go. I've got, have you see that okay? I'm assuming so, I'll probably make it a bit bigger. There we go. I'm calling out to a bit of .NET here, and if I run that, I get a message box. No big surprise there. So one of the things I want to do is I'm a programmer. So I'm going to turn this into a function, which I'm going to call message box. And I'm going to put $message, $title in here as parameters for it. I'm going to put a curly brace bit in. And let's put that in the right place there. And what I'm then going to do is I'm going to call it down the bottom of here. Now, just cut that off. Great, there we go. Put that on the end of there. And for this bit here, we'll now say $message, $title. Okay. So that's going to call my message box. And when I do that, I get this. PowerShell's been trying to be helpful here. And what it's done is it said, well, actually, when you pass things into PowerShell, PowerShell's a shell. So remember, the parameters are not separated by commas. They're separated by spaces. And in fact, what happens in PowerShell is if you put commas in, it says, it's an array. So what PowerShell has done is it's taken my lovely array I've passed in and then said, well, you want a string, so I'm just going to coalesce all this stuff down and just turn it and join the string together for you because you've passed in a string of arrays and you probably just want me to join them together. So one of the things you have to be very careful of in PowerShell is that. Now, the other thing is because we are in a parameter-based situation, if I flip these round, like so, reverse them around like that, and the final thing is, and at this point it starts to make a bit more sense because now you can actually see, if I put some minuses in, that really here when I'm calling that function, I'm really calling something that's a bit more of a command line parameter. So, you know, as per usual for command line parameters, you put minuses in front of them. Okay, so arrays are comma separated, basically. You don't necessarily need to put the brackets around the outside of them unless you're trying to sort of, there are some circumstances where you may need to put a bracket around for priority purposes. Calling .NET code needs parentheses. Somewhere, and if you look in the PowerShell spec, it's in section 7.1.3, that's where it says this. I suspect the reason why this happened was when they initially started, somebody said, well, how are we going to call .NET? And somebody said, well, we're going to call method info.invoke. And what does that take? That takes an array. So that's why I think somebody said, well, we'll put brackets around, put commas in. I can't actually think of a good reason why, when I look down the syntax charts, why that actually happened. I'm fairly sure it calls method info.invoke. The code's in core adapter.cs, and it gets a bit convoluted, so I couldn't be quite sure about that. So in summary, .NET methods, put brackets, put commas in. PowerShell stuff, basically stick a load of spaces in. Okay, so on to the next slide. Returning stuff. Well, that doesn't do what you might expect. So here I'm just going to go to a simple example. Let's get the mouse on the right screen. There we go, good. I've now lost my headset. This could be entertaining. Okay, there we go. So I've got a little bit of function here. It's got two functions at the top, one of which multiplies by 4, one which multiplies by 5. And then I've got a little tester function here that multiplies those, and then it's got a return statement at the bottom of it. So if I run this, what happens is the output that comes out is all three of those down the bottom of there, and those three items illustrate one of the problems with .NET, with PowerShell, which is this. The return statement here puts things into the output pipeline. Now, for PowerShell functions, what they normally return is they normally stack things up into a pipeline on the way out. And the pipeline, which I can show here, I say $A equals that. Whoops. $A equals, that's more like it. If I say $A, dot get type, like that. If I run this, come on, behave. You can see basically the output pipeline, which is what comes out of the function and gets basically when you pipe things together, it's just an array of objects. So there's nothing particularly special about it. Personally, I think for the return statement, they should not have let the expression stay on the end. It's just confusing if you're used to .NET stuff. So there are two ways out of this. One way out is do an assignment. So if I assign it to something else, let's not say B. Let's say I'll assign it into D. So if I assign it into a variable, the other alternative is to do this and pipeline the output of that function into the null. And then if I run it, oops, I've not actually displayed the value. So let's display the value. $A, there we go. If I do that, I get 36 back. So it's a bit confusing. It's one of the things that people go, well, I want to return a value back. And the problem is that one of the earlier things left something on the pipeline. I mean, you get some really weird results coming back out. People get strings appearing and all kinds of odd things happening. So back to the slide. The output wasn't necessarily what we were expecting. So return just puts the output onto the pipeline, so everything else that was still there stays there. Stuff that isn't assigned to or gets piped to out null gets written to the output pipeline. I've got quite a bit more on pipelines later on in the talk. So now we're going to go back to PowerShell again for a bit of stuff about writing things to the output. Where's my mouse gone? There we go. Thank you. Get the right slide in the end. That's better. There we go. Okay. So this particular bit here is, I'm just showing there's a couple of functions you can use, one of which is write to a host, one of which is write some output out to the outside world. And the difference between these is, well, I'll show you the difference actually. If I run this, down the bottom there it says hello there world. So what I can do, if I say here, $A equals test output, and then say write host $A, I'll do, and run that, what we see is that the there has moved. So basically write host writes things out to our host, which in this case is the PowerShell eyes. And because and write output writes values into the output stream. So there's a difference between the pair of them, and some people use them interchangeably. There's some other types of write. There's write verbose, write information, write debug, write error, write progress, which you can use for progress bar. So I'm just going to go back to PowerShell. And in here, I'm just going to put in, where's he gone? There we go. Write dash verbose, which would help if I could type. There we go. Verbose. And I'm going to do a write of a debug statement. Come on. There we go. I'll do debug. Okay. So if I run this, I don't get anything. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that if I go down to the bottom here, and I'll just type in $verbose preference, the verbose preference we currently have is to just silently continue. So it just silently continues on and doesn't do anything with the output. There are a couple of ways around that. I could assign a new value to it, which would be continue up here. The other alternative for something nice and simple like this is if my script takes parameters, like it normally has a parameter block like this where you define what they are, one of the things I can do is I can say it's got commandlet binding as an attribute, like that. And what that does is it makes our demo parse various values from the command line. So one of the things I can now say in here is stop backslash write demo 1. And if I say do it in verbose mode, and I forgot to save it. I forgot to save it. Right out in verbose mode, I get the verbose bit in there. And if I say -debug, I also get this little debug pop-up saying, do I want to continue with the operation? So there are it does help to put commandlet bindings on. It also means you get a lot of these verbs for free. There's a pile of other ones like error, and some error handling ones, and you also get some ones about information and lots of other bits and pieces. Otherwise, you're going to have to write something that parses them and sets the various internal preferences. So I tend not to do that. I tend to put the parameter 1 on. It's an awful lot easier most of the time. Right. So now for the fun bit. I'm off to do a bit of pester. So before I go there, what I need to do is drag the mouse back over here. Oh, that'll do. If you'll just excuse me just for a moment. There we go. Right. And I want to delete the mouse. I want a bit of Visual Studio. I have installed on this machine the Visual Studio PowerShell extensions. And I've started a little project here. All it does is it renames a file. It doesn't do a fat lot else. So if I go over to my solution and do an add item on there, add a new item. So one of the things I can do, because I've got this in there, is I can say, I would like a PowerShell test, please. Okay, and by convention, the tests get named the same as whatever script it is you're going to be testing. Pester does some stuff that's fine, that's a bit easy to work with if you keep the names the same as the script you're going to test. So I shall add that. And here, I've got a lovely script. Okay, so what I'm going to say here is this script here. Well, one of the things I want to do is I want to actually check what's going on. Describe and context are, broadly speaking, the same sort of thing. Describe wraps the outer layer of the test, does some setup logic. Context wraps usually your mocks, whatever you're going to create. So if you want to share them amongst multiple tests, context sort of tends to wrap the test bit. Rename, the describe tends to do the outer bit. So in here, I'm just going to say, well, my context is I want to have a test that says that rename is called. Okay, and one of the things I'd like to do about that is I want a file name. And I'm just going to say it's c:\temp/test.text. I want a mock item. Okay, and my mock is going to be, I want you to mock rename item, please, which is the thing that renames in PowerShell. Okay, when it runs, I would like to run my script.rename1.ps1. Okay, and I'd like to pass parameter to it minus path, $file name. Okay. And the other thing I'd like to do is once it's actually been called, and I'm sure we're all aware, I might say assert that the mock was called. Okay, so I'd like to say that my rename item mock, and I can also say at the end of here, some parameter filter bits. And here I can say, well, $path is the input parameter, normally to a rename item, so that can be $file name. And I got that wrong because I've just typed an equals in, and what I actually need to do is minus EQ, because we're in a shell language and greater than and less than pipe things around. So we all know that. Minus and let me just make sure I get this right. It's $new name equals, and I'm just going to put in here c/temp/test.text, and I will now put in, because I forgot again. There we go. That's better. Okay, so if I run this, whoops, didn't quite mean to do that. I'm going to go back to the test explorer here. There's actually a test plugin, so if I run that test, it fails. It's not recognized. So there is an issue, which, if we go into, there's a PowerShell interactive window, if we can get the mouse to the right place, there we go. That's where my test is running from. It's running from that folder there. So, all right, and it's got a completely different, I need demo. Actually, I'll do this with PowerShell eyes instead, it'll be quicker. Right, so one of the things I can do in here is there's a little helper that we get, which will create as a new tester piece. And if I go into demo and I edit my tests, you may notice here at the top of the script, for pester, by default, it puts in $here, which pulls where the current path is, and then here it actually just loads that script in to memory before it calls the rest of the test. I just need that line there, and I'm going to go back to PowerPoint. No, wrong one. There we go. Go back to here. I'm going to find my mouse, click on there, scroll up a bit. Drop that in there, and then I'm just going to say set location to be $here. Okay. I'll put $, in front of it. All right, and now my test is probably going to run with a bit of luck, assuming I've saved it. Well, actually, my test doesn't run. It fails because the mock's not there. Because if we looked at the code, you may remember there wasn't a fat lot of it there. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is cheat. So I'm going to go off to my little Git session, which you can't see, and reset the world. And make sure I pick the correct slide. There we go. And yeah, reload the world. So now I've actually put some script together in here. I've got a couple of parameters. I've got one parameter of the path. It's mandatory. I've got a oops, we failed flag. I'm going to call rename with a try catch around it because we're renaming stuff, and that does occasionally fail because another process has got something open or whatever. Then I'm going to call, so here we call the function, and if we failed, we write something out to the output path. There we go. So it's not the world's most complicated thing. If I go back to my test explorer again, and I run it all, hooray, it passed. Great. So no real not a huge surprise. So the next thing I want to do is, well, that was nice, but we're running with a mock object. So one of the things I actually want to do is I want to say, great, I don't want to do it with a mock one. I want to do it with a real one. And Pester helps us with that. It's got a lovely function. A lovely thing it does is, for the life cycle of my context, it will make me a new disk drive called test drive, which is very nice, thank you. So I shall now go away and create a new item, which is my file name. Okay, and I need to give it a file. I need to give it a type. So the item type is going to be a file. And I can get rid of my mocking line because I don't need that anymore. Okay. I definitely don't want to assert that my mock was called because there's no mock there to call. And here, what I then want to say is, well, okay, I've done all of that, so I want to say $filename.back. Okay, well, the way this works is you use a pipe, and in Pesterland there's an assertion function which is called should, and what I can then say is that should exist. And what I can also say is, well, that's great, $filename, well, that should not exist. Okay, so Pest is reasonably powerful in that respect. If I run all the tests, well, somewhat annoyingly, my test has failed. Now, the reason why my test has failed, we're going to come back to in a minute. I'm not sure what it is. So what I'm going to do, or I'm going to pretend. Oh, okay, well, that's another problem. Well, let's fix that up before we go. Thank you. That's not the problem because we never got there. So I'll come into here, and one of the things I'll do is, I'm not sure what's going on, so I will just say in here, right, verbose, renaming to $new path. I think I put that in the wrong place there. Yes, I have. I'll track that down one. Okay, and I'm pretty sure we're probably getting an error somewhere in here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a right verbose. There we go. And I'm just going to say error and $_. And $_ is basically the exception that we just caught. So that's the thing got put on the pipe, which was an exception. So $_ will be the things on the pipe. That's what we need to display out. So save that away. Back to my test. Yep. And one thing I need to do on this, on the end of here, I actually need to put a minus verbose, because otherwise I'm not going to see anything. And then if I run all the tests, well, that's better. And I get an error which says, cannot rename specified target because it represents a path or device name. Well, actually, I know what's wrong, which is that rename here, in this particular chunk here, should not have $new path in it with a dot backing, because that's got all the pathing stuff in there. So what I actually want to say is $new name equals split path. And I want to say it's $new path is what I want to split. And I'd like the leaf off the end of it, please. Okay, and if I put $new name on the end of there, and if I go back to my test up here, because this is going to screw up this bit over here, so I want that to be test.text.bag. There's now no path in there. Right, so run all of those. Right, well, that's good news. Both tests passed. One thing we might have noticed was that I didn't feel like, why the hell did I get my failure thing running around? So one of the things I can do is go back to here. I need to be in... Oh, actually, no, not from here. Let me just go back to this one. NDC. Hello. You're just going to be funny on me, aren't you, today? All right, okay, it's not going to work from there. No, we'll have to go back to Pester. And of course you pop up on the wrong screen. That's not very helpful. Thank you. There we go. NDC. No, window. Right. And that's more like it. There we go. That's the one I wanted to be in. So one of the things I can say in here is I can actually say invoke Pester from the command line here. I can say minus code coverage, like so. And if I put my script name in, like so, it will run it, and it'll tell me, well, 70% of things didn't actually happen in here, and in particular the two that didn't happen was my right verboses for the error handling cases, and the bit where I actually got the failed out of it. So one of the things I can also do is I can invoke the script analyzer. Okay, and it says the variable failed is assigned to but it's never used. So at this point here, I need to do a little bit of talking about scope. Oh, come on, behave. I'm probably on the wrong branch. I'm on the wrong branch. Sorry, guys. Doesn't help me. There we go. And where's the mouse gone? There we go. Put that on the end of there. And right, there we go. I've got some code here, and this is going to show one of the problems with scope in here. If I run this, I don't get what I was expecting to see, really, because I was rather hoping that this assignment here to the magic number would change the magic number down here after my test had been run. And the problem here, basically, is when you do an assignment inside a function, we get, I need to put script colon in front of it, like that, at which point I'm setting the scope of the variable I'm setting. And this is one of those things, again, that is kind of weird .NET users. The actual doing assignment to something creates you a local variable. So you'd have to watch out for that one. And, of course, it can be quite subtle. So it's not too difficult to fix. OK, so we'll go back to Visual Studio. Over here. Yeah, I want to reload everything. Thank you very much. OK, and one of the things I can do here is I've got a test down the bottom of here for my error handling. So here I'm just saying, well, for the mock, make it throw something. If it runs, it should have, as in the output, should have be like failed. And I still have to make sure that my actual assert was called. So if I F5 that lot, oh, no, didn't do that. I meant to run the whole test over here, didn't I? It's more like it. Better. Oh, it's failed. Well, that's probably because over here, what I haven't done is I need to put script colon in. Okay, and if I run that, jolly good, they all passed. So, yeah, amazing. I'm just about on schedule. What do we learn? So Pester arrange, if we say Pester's got an arrange act assert pattern on it, arrange is describing context, group tests, and give life cycle for things like mocks and local variables. Act, well, it runs the command. Assert, well, should performs lots of the assertions. And we've got assert.mock call, which can check for calls out to your mocks. The other good things are test drive, provides you with an isolated filing system. It does leak. So when you do a directory, you can sometimes see the full temporary path. Script analyzer can give some useful information out for you. Variable scoping can bite you. The script analyzer, by the way, is configurable. And you can get code coverage from your tests. So it's worth doing sometimes just to check that somebody's actually got decent error handling in. And mocking objects can quite easily force errors. One of the problems with mock objects is you can only mock PowerShell objects. You can't mock .NET ones. So that can be a bit of a nuisance. You may have to just wrap them up. The other one is Pester does not compare collection types well. In fact, PowerShell doesn't do it very well either. Go to this site here, or use the two install modules to install them to the PowerShell gallery. I'm going to use one of those later on. So, 2016. A very bad year for celebrities. Several people died. David Bowie, George Michael, Carrie Fisher died, Prince died, and this guy died. You probably don't know who he is. He's actually quite a famous barber, and that's a photograph I took of him 5 or 6 years ago. It's a guy called Dick Bradsell. And originally my talk was going to be on later on in the afternoon, on Friday. Anyway, Dick created these cocktails here, Espresso Martini, Bramble, Treacle, Wibble. The top two of those are actually in the International Bartender Association cocktail competitions. The Espresso Martini was created allegedly when a rather famous model came into the bar Dick was working at the time and said, I want a drink to wake me up and then hug me up. Allegedly, it's Kate Moss, but I'm not sure I believe that, to be honest with you. So those top two are in there. And I thought, right, I'm going to do a cocktail-based demo because I want something that's got bits and pieces in it. I was on late on the afternoon. I thought, it's Friday afternoon, I should be able to find out where I can get some ice from. So I'll make a cocktail while I'm doing the demo. Also this. John Skeet is famous for drinking girly cocktails. And there's a picture of him with a girly cocktail. So I think I'm in fairly good company here. Okay, right. So I'm going to do cocktails and sort of in semi-homage to every MasterChef thing ever, cocktails 3 ways. So I'm going to talk to my cocktail stuff, do it 3 different ways. So back to a bit of GitHub. Back to a bit of Git, where it's gone. Mouse. Come on, that'll do. From that way around, there we go. You have to excuse me here, I'm flipping around branches. It's pretty good. Okay, so back to this. And I'm just going to... Come on, mouse, where have you gone? There we go. That'll do. Slide 11, that's better. Right. Okay, so PowerShell's great, not too bad for talking to WCF-style web services. Sometimes the syntax gets a bit clunky, but it's okay in general. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a proxy for my service, which is talking to this URL over here. It's running on my local host. I've got a cocktail web service. I wish it delivered cocktails. It doesn't. It just delivers ingredient lists and recipes. Mine is class cocktail. Well, this gets compiled into an internal .NET class. You can get some really strange error messages out of PowerShell because that .NET class lives around for quite a long time. And it gets both the port number and the URL into the class name. And if you try and swap what you're talking to by rerunning that, you can end up with it saying, no, sorry, I've got this class already in memory, I'm not going to overwrite it for you. Anyway, so the next thing we'll do, get some results. So I'm going to go and get, depending on the ingredients here, and I put a little @ in front of that bracket there, which says turn this into an array. So I'm passing in an array of ingredients with names of ingredients in. And then it's going to tell me what the heck I can make. So, let's run it. I can make Negronis and Americanos, which is true. Although, strictly speaking, I need some soda water to make an Americano. So once I've done that, that's great. One thing, there's the mouse, good, found the mouse. So one thing you may have noticed is that I'm tending to use single quotes and double quotes pretty interchangeably, and I probably didn't explicitly point this out, and maybe you already know. But within PowerShell, if you put double quotes around it, it will do a variable expansion for you. So it'll expand the results out there. I'll now just run that one. And look, I can make Negronis and Americanos. We've not really moved on too far here. So I'm now going to go down to the bottom of here. I'm going to do some more typing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to get the recipe. I want to say $recipe equals $service dot. It would help if I put an E on the end of it. Dot. It's got a load of stuff in here, but I want to get a recipe. Okay, I happen to know recipes take strings, which is very handy there. So if I say, put a dollar in front of that, dollar results, and I put a 0 there, and I do that, and then I see what my dollar recipe looks like. Well, it looks like that, and as you can see, it does have these god-awful ingredients bits in here, and they look pretty horrible. It had a pretty good go at displaying it, but it's not doing it's not doing anything great here. So one of the things I can try saying to it is, let's see if it does a better job. If I say, well, I'd like you to look at the ingredients, please, and then I'd like you to pipe the output of that through format table, which will display a pretty format for me. Now again, that's not great. It's a web service, so again, we've got kind of amount and amount specified have sort of leaked through from my abstraction because it's nullable. So that wasn't good. I can do some fairly simple things. So if you've got reasonably sensible things, you can say, I'd like to see amount, unit, and the ingredients, like so. And then at least I get a table that's sort of got just the bits that I was actually interested in. But I've still got the problem with that. Now, one of the ways out of this is if I notepad up, where's he gone? Oh, there we go. It's that one. Good. No, I don't mean to notepad it. I did not mean to do it. I meant to PS edit it, which was a mistake. Sorry, guys. There we go. Better. One of the things I can do is I can assign it to a variable. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm creating an array, because it's got commas in it, which then contains some hash maps, which then contain a couple of key value pairs in there, one of which is the expression. So I can put the amount out, I can put the label out, I can say, here's the unit, and then for my ingredient here, and $_ says means the current item in the pipe, I can get it to do ingredient.name. So I'll run that. There we go. Come back to here again. And if I say, well, there's my ingredients, all I have to do for that is I just need to say, pass in format ingredients on the end of here, and now I get a sensible looking list coming back out the far end of it. So that's probably my recommendation if you're doing something where you're just trying to get sort of sensible looking lists back out the far end. There is another way of doing this. We're going to come around to that later on. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. I've converted this into something that's a bit more sensible. It takes a couple of parameters on the command line, so it parses those out for us. It writes a recipe out, and then down the bottom of here, it calls $service with some results on it, spit the results out, get the recipe, write the recipe out to the outside world. So, because I've got parameters on, I'll need to do it from the command line down the bottom of here, so I'll say dot cocktail5.ps1. Thank you. And the server name will be a local host, and the port number will be 30,000. Right. I'm not sure if you can read that here. It says at the bottom of here, variable reference is not valid, was not followed by a valid variable name character considered using $curly brackets. What the heck's going on here? What's actually interesting is this bit down here, where it says invalid variable reference with drive. Now, one of the things you may note about URLs is they've got colons in them. One of the things about PowerShell is if I do $n for the environment, when I put $ and a colon in, it does a lookup in that environment variable. So we use colons to do lookups and hash maps and things. PS drives, which is what $m is an instance of. So if I say get PS, PS drive, that lists all the drives that are on my system, in my PowerShell environment. So we've got things like the aliases. So if I put an alias in for flipping things around, cert, which is certificates, end, functions. And you may notice down the bottom of there, HKCU, which is, of course, my registry. So if I go into my current user registry, I can do a dir in it. I can change directories. I can do lots of things. And most of the commands which are calling new item to create a file, create item, all those sorts of stuff, you can run all of those against the registry. Nervously, I'll go back to the C drive, thank you very much. So it's quite useful to know those are all there. So we'll just fix that. And I'll take the suggestion. And I'm fairly sure I'm running PowerShell 5 because I'm running Windows 10. I'm fairly sure earlier versions of PowerShell had much worse error messaging on this and didn't even tell you, didn't tell you what the hell to do. So when I first started out, this was just irritating as heck. And we'll come back down to here. I'll save it first. We'll come back down to here. And we'll go through this little lot here. We'll run that. And hey presto, I've got my recipe for a Negroni down the bottom of here. So, next thing I can do is right. I've got a bit fancier now. I've split this stuff up. I've got a function which says get things by ingredients. I've got a function which here takes write recipes in. And down the bottom of here, I've got this where I'm going to call get ingredients. So these things here are taking parameters from the pipeline. And I've got another recipe, one down the bottom here that I want to write, which is to get my recipes. So first thing I need to do is rip off this attribute here and go down to my recipe one here, where it's got a parameter, which is the cocktail name, and put that attribute on there. So that basically says the cocktail name is going to come from the pipeline, guys. So there we go. The next thing I've got is for each item, for each time this gets put on the pipeline, begin gets called first, process then gets called second once per item of things on the pipeline, and then end gets called at the end, so if you want to do some cleanup stuff. So in my case, when I fire this bit up, I'll have to go and get a service. So there's no problem at all with doing that. And I'm not even going to bother cleaning it up. And then down here, in my process one, I would like to say $script service .get a recipe for tab, thank you, my cocktail name. Okay, and that will get the recipe. Because I've not assigned it anywhere, I'll go into the output pipeline. So we come down to here. So this goes get the ingredients from my list of ingredients, which will put the 2 recipes on there. We then pipe it through get recipes. This gets called once to set it up, and then for each of the 2 cocktails that gets called, and then we call write recipes, and that just gets everything else passed into it. So if I run that, I get 2 recipes down the bottom there. You can see the Americano and the Negroni scrolled off the top. So the final thing I want to do is I'm just going to invoke the script analyzer on this. On cocktail number 7 and see what it moans about. So the commandlets really should be singular, according to this. $null should be on the other side of the equalities. I'm not even going to bother fixing those. We'll run out of time if I do that. So, back to a bit of PowerPoint again. I've done cocktails that way with a web service. There was a long section of talk where I converted it into a PowerShell module, a stage at a time. Not going to bother. I haven't really got time for that. But what I have got time to just do is get that, okay. Mouse, come on, behave. Oh, I'll go that way around, I'll do. Yeah, reload everything. What I actually want to do is I want to open recent projects and solutions, and I would like to open this one, the Cocktail PSM one. So we're not going to worry too much about the other bits and pieces. I've got a test here, and just sort of, where's the Test Explorer gone? Is that Test Explorer? No, Test Explorer. There we go, can't see for looking. Right, there we go, that's the one. I have got a test, and if I run this test, it passes, which is wrong, because by now we should all know that this lot only spits out 2 cocktails. So here, this particular bit is now incorrect. So I can fix this by using the match array unbounded, okay? Which basically says, which is one of the install commands for the bit which I said earlier on, Pester doesn't get this right. And the other thing I need to do on this side here is I need to wrap this up here like that to make it into an individual item. And the most important bit is the comma at the front of the line, which basically says, instead of taking the array, because PowerShell will then expand the array out into single items to pass it down the pipeline, don't do that. Wrap it up so our pipeline contains a single item on it, which is the array. See what I mean? So it's wrap the array in an array. So we've got 2-dimensional array here. And if you don't do that, match array won't do the right things for you. And if I just run all of those, now I actually get a much more useful error. And if I just scroll back up a bit, match array unbounded is not a valid should operator. What? Oh, that's because it's not unbounded, it's unordered. I don't know why I said unbounded. Unordered, that's better. Let's try that again. There we go, it should match array unordered, and it's moaning about the fact it's got hello on the end of it. And if we scroll back up a little bit here, it'll actually show that here. Missing the item hello. So if I just delete that just for sanity's sake and run it again. It's a PowerShell module, as you can see here at the top we're doing loading it in. And that's the end of that one, because that's no real fun. So, done all of that. On to my next page. We will go for this one here. Oh, right. And I'll stay in PowerShell. Yeah, we know. Used to all. I want to load up my cocktail finder. So this is actually the solution for my web service. And one of the last things I want to do with this is I want to actually take my web service and throw it away. I don't really want a web service. I've got a perfectly good DLL, so why the hell don't I call it instead? So to do that, I create a commandlet. I inherit from PS commandlet. Attributes say what it's actually called, so get goes in front of it. There's some common verbs like invoke and update. Ingredients, the name of the one I'm going to do. It processes a record in the middle of it. I override that. Basically, I just read them in and just write all the objects straight back out to the pipeline. So I just grab all the ingredients, read them in, smash them straight back out again. My get recipe over here, it's a little bit more complicated. Not hugely so, but a little bit. Again, we inherit from PS commandlet. Parameters on the command line go in here as properties. I've set both of these as they come from the pipeline. So you can either pass it a list of names, or you can say you can pass it a list of ingredients, and it'll get the right one filled in for me. Value from pipeline by property name, we'll come back to in a bit. So when I begin processing here, I didn't have a base in there. I can just read it, read the ingredients in. When I process the record, if it's a name, I do a for each on it and write out the objects. If it's in stock, then I go around to there and write all of those out. So that's my bit over here. If I build that, build, that's good. I'm going to go to here. Oh, okay. And if I go back up one, and I go into, I think it's slide 13. Yep, it is, good. And if I edit this, PS edit, not backslash. Alcoholic cocktails. Right. So, this imports my module in. I then call get ingredients. And thanks to the power of the pipeline, I can say, go away, get a where object, where the alcohol by volume is greater than 30. Because I want to find out what all the value cocktails are, the ones that have got lots of alcohol in. And I then call get recipe, and I'm passing ingredients in here, and I'm going to pass alcoholic into it. Okay? So if I run that, unfortunately, there's only 2 of them that have got that in. And the reason for that is most vermouths have got an alcohol by volume of about 17% in them, and they tend to get used a lot for flavouring. If I run it now and say it's 10, I get quite a few more. I get things like martinis as well. So I'm just going to put that back to 30, because otherwise I may screw the world over a bit. So down here, I'm going to say, right, great. I've done all of that. I've shown it actually does something. And I'm going to create a new variable called $Negroni, which is going to be get recipe. And that's going to take Negroni. Good. Okay. So if I display that, it still looks a bit rubbish. Yeah. If I do the same thing with .ingredients, it still looks a bit rubbish. Okay. One of the things that's nice about a proper C# project one is I've got this format thing in here, and this is a XML formatting file. I'll just go to the top, and here I can say, well, if the type is cocktail ingredient with quantity, format it like this for a table. And here I say property name is item, property name is unit, and here I've got a little script block in which will look up the ingredient name, because it's not a property, so I can work my way down a bit further. Okay. And I've got another one down here for the cocktail recipe. Well, if I go back into my IDE over here, I have got a little helper thing that reads that format in. I'll just display it quickly. It's not doing a lot, it's just basically calling that lot there, and it's far too much work to type in. And if what I now do is have a look at the ingredients, hey presto, I've got my table back again. If I look at $Negroni, well, that's not so great. I've still got this problem with the ingredients bit. So, my next thought was, well, maybe I'll get lucky. And here we've got cocktail name recipe. I've got dollar ingredients here. So maybe if I just pipe that through format table, I'll get lucky and my table will get formatted nicely for me. So I'll come back over here and I'll do an update format on it. And if I now display the Negroni, no, and it's worse actually in many ways, because now it's gone from being something I might understand the type of to a pile of internal type formatting bits and pieces. So I will now go back to Visual Studio. And in fact, I'm now going to put on the end of here, I'm going to pipe that through out to string, because now it's going to be a string. If I do this, over here, I'll just update the format again. And now, if I look at my Negroni, I get a reasonably nicely formatted list where I put the table in there. Now, this is important. This is a nice and cheap and dirty hack. if you go online for this, what lots of people say to do is you can group things by path. And there's a huge XML file which has got all the file format stuff in there. Everybody seems to start off with the one for files because when you do a directory listing that's recursive, you get the directory name at the top, which is one bit, and then you get the list of items underneath it when people want to nest things together. I looked at it and went, good God, that's far too much like hard work. That's a much cheaper way of doing it. Okay. So, phew, we've done all of that. Where have I down this list, am I? Oh, yes. Right. One small issue is if I do this, $alcoholic, and pipe it through get recipe. Well, it would help if I finished off typing it in. Get nothing. Well, that's not good. Okay. So I better go back to Visual Studio. I'd like a list of cocktails, please. There we go. And one thing I'm going to do just before I forget is I'm going to go into my cocktail module here. And one of the things I do need to do, this is a manifest for your PowerShell module. It gives you a ton of information in it. How many for time? Ooh, not too bad. And that tells you, please import this in at the same time as everything else happens. So, I want to go back to my test explorer here. I want solution. Sorry, I want some tests. Where's the test gone? Oh no, I want to change. Yeah, okay, I want to change branch. So, I'm just going to close this down. Close the window. Close that window there. Okay. So I have to really, come on, reset that. Change my branch to that branch there. I didn't see that there. No, don't bother saving the changes. Thank you very much. I really don't want you to do that. Fire up a Visual Studio. Fire up one of those. And drag that one across the right window. We'll probably want that later. Okay, right. Where's Visual Studio gone? There we go. Gotcha. Right. I'm going to reopen that project because I've just changed a load of stuff underneath its feet. And I've had some really weird effects when I've been doing this in the past. So let me just open that up again. So I've got some tests for that. I've put a testing module in over here. Okay. And when it actually finally decides to open, I've got some tests over here that are doing all of this lot. So I've got a pile of name tests here where I'm testing with some names. You may remember I said about the value from the object property name. Here I'm creating a couple of properties, a couple of objects with a name and a price in them. And when I do that, the name will get pulled out when I pipe it through, down here. And finally, down the bottom of here, I've got a test where I'm doing by passing in on the input object. Now, input object is the normal name for this sort of stuff. It wouldn't normally be called ingredients. So I'm going to comment that one out. And I'm going to uncomment this one here. Okay, and if I go to my test explorer, oh, well, first of all, I better go to my get recipe here. I'm just going to put a breakpoint here, which is one of the great things about the integration. And if I go to my test explorer and I open up my cocktail test on the bottom of here, I should, cocktail ingredients test, that's the one, be able to debug it. And that will debug through. Keep my fingers crossed, because this seems to be a 50-50 item, whether it works or not. Come on. Think about it. PowerShell gets invoked. Lots of other things get invoked. Nervous. And that didn't work. What a bugger. Okay. You can debug these things. And basically our problem we've got deep down is that this is only getting called the process once per. And basically PowerShell splits these things up. So the quickest way to fix this is up at the top. I'm conscious I'm going to get time trouble here. So I'm not going to try and fix the debug bit. I will just add a private variable called instock. Oops, sorry. List of ingredients. Come on, behave. Thank you, that's better. Which I'm going to call instock, which we'll set to null. Okay. So when we start up here in the begin, I'm just going to say instock equals a new. Thank you very much. New one of those. Okay. The end process down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if instock dot count is greater than 0. A couple of curly braces. I think I'm almost done, honestly. Grab that lot there. Cut them out. Drop them in. Get rid of that bit there. And in here, rather than doing that, what I'm going to say is instock dot add the ingredient that came in. Oh, sorry, it shouldn't be that. It should be input object. There we go. Put a semicolon on the end of there. That should have been enough. Oh, what have I done wrong? I don't know. I'm not even going to fix this now. I'm going to. Sorry? What's there? That's what it is there. Thank you. Oh. Now what are you moaning about? I think I'm probably now missing an end brace, am I? Okay, try that again. There we go. Now is it happy? Yes, now we're happy. No, we're not happy. I don't understand why it's not happy. I'm going to ignore that. There's a perfectly good slide with it on later on. And I'm going to go back to my demo, back to my PowerPoint slides. You've seen most of it anyway. So we can write it in C#. What do we learn? Well, parameters are flexible. Pipeline really is the way you should work. Formatting with custom formats isn't that hard. Modules need functions, variable exporting. C# version, it was worth having a magic formatting bit. I'm doing a good, bad, weird lightning talk on Friday, at which point it's all much more pre-canned. So I was going to say expect something slicker, but we don't know. Twitter ID is there. GitHub is there. And, whoops, final bonus item is a useful cheat sheet for PowerShell. Which is basically what all the curly brace brackets bit does it do. And that's it, really. Any questions? Fine. If not, go and get some food. Thank you.